They abandoned a poor girl in a sack to die, but the cowboy's daughter whispered, "Papa, she's Mama." The dawn came cold and pale over the Wyoming plains. The frost lay thick upon the grass, crunching beneath the hooves of Clint Walker's horse as he rode through the silence of early morning. A red scarf was tied around his neck, pulled high against the bitter air, his breath forming clouds that drifted away like ghosts. Beside him, on a smaller horse that struggled to keep up, rode his little daughter Ellie, barely 8 years old, with her mother's curls and her father's stubborn eyes. She hummed softly, swinging her small boots as the rising sun painted gold across the hills. They were headed toward the south pasture, same as every morning, to check on the cattle before the day began. Clint had been a widower for 3 years now. Every dawn, the same ache pressed behind his ribs, the memory of a wife lost too soon and the promise to raise their little girl right, even if the world around them was hard and unkind. The air was sharp that morning. The creek ahead shimmered beneath a thin sheet of ice, its slow current whispering under the frozen crust. And then, Ellie's small voice broke the quiet. "Papa," she said softly, pointing toward the bend in the creek, "what's that sack moving for?" Clint followed her finger. Down in the half-frozen mud, tangled between reeds, was a burlap sack, tied tight at the top, its surface quivering like something trapped inside. A dark stain spread across the frozen ground beneath it. Clint's brow furrowed. He handed his reins to Ellie. "Stay here, sweetheart." "But Papa." "Stay." He slid down the icy bank, boots sinking into the sludge. The closer he got, the stronger that awful feeling grew in his gut, the one that told him this wasn't no animal. The sack gave one faint twitch, then went still. He yanked the knife from his belt and slashed the rope. The fabric fell open and Clint froze. Inside lay a young woman. Her hair, matted and damp, clung to her cheeks. Her face was swollen, one eye bruised shut. Her wrists were bound and blood soaked through her dress. The breath coming from her lips was so faint it fogged only for a second before vanishing into the cold. Clint's stomach twisted. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Sweet Lord," he whispered. "Who could have done this?" Pinned to the torn bodice of her dress was a crumpled note, written in angry black ink. "For the coyotes." She brought shame. His jaw tightened. The wind howled through the trees like a warning, but Clint wasn't listening. He slid his arms beneath her frail body, lifting her out of the sack. She weighed less than a child. Behind him, Ellie disobeyed her father's order, as she often did, and came stumbling down the hill. She gasped when she saw the woman's face. "Papa, she's still breathing?" Clint nodded, pressing 2 fingers against the woman's neck. There was a pulse, weak but there. "Barely," he murmured. "We ain't leaving her here." He turned to carry her toward the horses, but Ellie's trembling voice stopped him. "Papa, she's Mama." Clint froze mid-step. His chest tightened. He turned to his daughter, whose small eyes were filled not with fear but certainty. "Ellie, what did you say?" She pointed to the woman's bruised face. "She's Mama. I saw her in my dream last night. God showed me. Said we'd find her today." Clint's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to correct her, to tell her that her mama had been gone for years, but something in Ellie's voice made him pause. She spoke with such calm conviction, as if heaven itself had whispered it to her. He looked back at the woman, bloodied, broken, breathing like a dying bird, and something inside him cracked. A feeling he hadn't known in years stirred to life again. Hope. "All right," he said softly. "Let's get her home." He lifted the woman onto his horse, wrapping her in his coat. Ellie rode close beside them, glancing up every few seconds, whispering soft prayers under her breath. The trail home was long, the wind fierce, and Clint's arms burned from holding her steady, but he refused to slow down. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had climbed high, melting the frost into glistening dew. Clint carried the woman inside and laid her gently upon his late wife's bed, still made with the quilt Ellie had helped him sew the winter before. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cold as stone. Clint lit the fire, brought water to boil, and pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. Ellie knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Papa, will she die?" He hesitated. "Not if I can help it." He didn't even realize how his voice shook when he said it. Outside, the wind howled again, rattling the shutters as though echoing the girl's pain. But inside, for the first time in years, Clint's cabin wasn't silent. The fire crackled, the kettle hissed, and Ellie's soft voice filled the room as she prayed over the stranger. The woman who had been left in a sack to die. And the woman who, somehow, his daughter already called Mama. The blizzard rolled in 2 days later. Snow came thick and unrelenting, blanketing the Walker Ranch beneath a heavy silence that seemed to swallow every sound but the wind's low moan. The old cabin creaked under the weight of it, smoke curling steady from the chimney as the fire inside fought to keep the cold out. Clint hadn't slept much since the morning he found the girl. She lay pale and still in his late wife's bed, her breathing ragged, her body weak as a ghost's. The bruises on her face had turned dark and sunken. Her lips were cracked from fever. He sat beside her through every hour of the night, changing the cool cloth on her brow, coaxing small sips of water between her trembling lips. Each time she stirred, it was only to whisper a name. "Luke, no more, please?" Then she'd fall quiet again, her head rolling weakly to the side. Clint didn't know who Luke was, but he hated the name already. Ellie stayed close too. She'd make small drawings for the woman, setting them on the nightstand as if they were charms. Pictures of the ranch, the creek, the three of them holding hands. When she wasn't drawing, she prayed, her little voice soft but sure. "God, please let her wake up," she'd whisper each night. "Please don't take Mama away again." Clint would glance over at her then, the firelight flickering over her serious little face, and something in his chest would tighten. He'd lost his wife to fever, buried her on the hill overlooking the pasture. He'd built this cabin with his bare hands for her. Since then he'd let the world grow quiet around him. No laughter, no singing, just work and survival. But now, in the middle of this storm, there was a stranger in his home, and somehow it didn't feel wrong. It felt like the world had paused to bring her here. The third night she woke. It was just before dawn. Clint was dozing in a chair when he heard a weak cough. His eyes snapped open. The girl's lashes fluttered against her cheeks, and her hand moved just barely, gripping the quilt. He leaned forward. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe. Don't move too quick." Her eyes opened, green though dim and unfocused. She blinked at the firelight, at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, then at Clint. Fear flared in her gaze. She tried to sit up, gasping, her hand flying to her neck as if expecting a noose. Hey, it's all right." Clint reached out slowly, palms open. "You're all right now. You're at my place. You were hurt, but I found you down by the creek." She froze, her chest heaving. Then she whispered, voice shaking. "The sack." "Yeah," he said quietly. "But you're out of it now." Her eyes filled, tears spilling fast and hot down her bruised cheeks. She turned her face away, curling in on herself as if to make her body disappear. "I was supposed to die," she said hoarsely. "They said I was filth. They said I wasn't worth saving." Clint's jaw tightened. He'd heard cruelty before, seen what men could do when their hearts turned hard, but hearing it from her lips made him want to punch the wind itself. He pulled the blanket higher over her trembling shoulders. "You listen to me," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever they said, whatever they did, you're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you under this roof." Her eyes flicked to him then, uncertain, searching. And for a moment he thought she might believe him. Just then a soft knock came at the door, followed by Ellie's small voice. "Papa, can I come in?" Clint smiled faintly. "Go on, sweetheart." Ellie stepped inside, holding a steaming bowl between her mittened hands. The smell of warm broth filled the room. "Morning," she said brightly, though her tone was shy. "Papa made stew. You should try some." The woman's lips trembled. "I can't pay you," she whispered. "I have nothing." Ellie frowned. "You don't need anything," she said simply. "Papa says good people don't need paying. They just help 'cause it's right." Clint's heart gave a strange ache at that. Out of the mouths of children came the truest words. He helped the woman sit up just enough to sip the broth. Her hands shook so badly he steadied them with his own. Her skin was cold, fragile, but alive. When she'd eaten half, she started crying again, quietly this time, the tears just slipping down. "Thank you," she whispered. "For not leaving me." Clint cleared his throat roughly, pretending to busy himself with the fire. "Ain't a thing to thank me for. Anyone with a soul would have done the same." "Not anyone," she said softly. And he didn't argue because he knew she was right. That night, as the storm finally broke and the first moonlight in days spilled through the window, Clint sat by her bedside again. Ellie was asleep in the next room. The woman, still nameless to him, breathed evenly now, her color returning. He found himself watching her hand resting lightly on the quilt, how small it looked compared to his. There was something unspoken between them already, something fragile as frost. He spoke low, almost to himself. "Whoever you are, whoever hurt you, you're gonna have a different ending here. You hear me?" She stirred faintly, not waking, but her lips curved in the faintest whisper of peace. And as Clint leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally overtaking him, the wind outside fell still, as if the land itself was holding its breath for what was yet to come. The morning sun crept over the hills like a slow mercy. For the first time in weeks, the Wyoming sky was clear, blue and wide as forever. The snow had melted, leaving the earth damp and steaming. The sound of dripping water echoed from the eaves of Clint's cabin as he carried in firewood, boots tracking mud across the worn floorboards. Inside, the woman he'd rescued was awake and sitting upright, a wool shawl draped over her shoulders. Her face still bore faint bruises, but the color had returned to her cheeks. Ellie sat beside her, showing off a drawing she'd made, a stick family standing by the creek, the little one holding hands with a taller figure in a hat. "That's Papa," Ellie said proudly. "And that's me. And that's you, miss. You're smiling." The woman's lips trembled into a smile of her own, thin but real. "That's a lovely picture, darling." Clint paused at the doorway, watching the scene quietly. 4 days, the cabin had been filled with whispers and worry, the weight of fever and fear pressing over every moment. But now there was laughter again, small and bright as birdsong. He set down the wood. "You're looking stronger," he said gently. "How's the head?" "Better," she said softly. Her voice was clearer now, though still fragile. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Walker." "You can start by calling me Clint," he said. She gave a faint nod. "Then, thank you, Clint." He smiled faintly. "And what do I call you?" The question hung in the air a moment too long. The woman's hands tightened around the quilt. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "My name's Clara. Clara Mayfield." Ellie beamed. "Clara's a pretty name." Clint, though, noticed how Clara's eyes flicked toward the window, as if afraid that saying her name out loud might summon something dark from the past. That afternoon, while Ellie played outside with her doll, Clara told her story. She sat by the fire, her thin hands folded in her lap, gaze fixed on the flames. Clint sat across from her, silent, knowing better than to interrupt. "My father's a preacher," she began softly. "A man of God, or so he says. But there's no forgiveness in him. Only rules and shame." Her words came slow at first, then faster, as if once she started she couldn't stop. She'd grown up in a small mountain town east of the valley. Her mother died young, leaving her under the strict hand of a man who preached holiness but practiced cruelty. When Clara turned 19, her father promised her to one of his church elders, a man twice her age, one with money and influence. She didn't want to marry him. But saying no meant rebellion, meant sin. And when she refused, her father said she was possessed. Her voice broke as she spoke of what came next, how the elder took her by force, how her father turned his back, how she ran, how she found shelter for a time, before the same men caught her and dragged her home again. "I thought they'd forgive me," she said, tears glinting in the firelight. "But they said I'd brought shame. They said the world would be better if it didn't have to look at me anymore." Her voice fell to a whisper. "So they put me in that sack. Said I should pray while I still had breath." The room went deathly still. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to hush. Clint's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wanted to stand, to break something, to ride to that mountain town and show those men what justice really was. But he didn't. Instead, he drew a long breath and said quietly, "You're safe now, Clara. You hear me? They don't get to touch you ever again." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I don't know what to do next. I have no home, no kin." "You got one now," Clint said simply. "This roof will cover you as long as you need it." "And Ellie?" she asked hesitantly. "She doesn't mind?" Clint smiled. "Ellie decided that the moment she called you Mama." Clara's lips parted in shock. "She said that?" "Day I found you," he said. "Didn't make much sense to me at the time. Still don't fully. But she's got a way of seeing things others can't." Clara turned her face away, her breath catching softly. For the first time in a long while, someone had given her a name that wasn't meant to shame her. A place that wasn't meant to hurt her. That night, long after Ellie had gone to bed, Clint stepped outside. The stars were burning bright over the plains, and the air smelled of thawing earth and pine. He leaned on the porch rail, his mind turning over Clara's words. He'd seen pain before, war, hunger, death, but there was something about hers that cut deep. Maybe it was because she'd been left to die while still fighting to live. Maybe because she reminded him of his late wife in small, impossible ways. The tilt of her head, the way she said thank you like it was a prayer. When he went back inside, Clara was still awake, staring at the fire. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm. He nodded toward the flames. "Fire's burnin' low." Mind if I add a log? She shook her head. No. I like the quiet. He sat beside the hearth anyway, just close enough that the warmth brushed his arm. You should rest, he said. I will, she replied softly. It just feels strange being safe. I keep waiting to wake up and find it gone. Clint looked at her then, his voice low but certain. You won't. Not while you're under my roof. Her eyes glimmered, reflecting the firelight. For the first time since he'd found her, she didn't flinch from his gaze. And when she finally lay down, whispering a soft good night, Clint sat watching the embers fade, knowing in his bones that everything on that ranch, the land, the quiet, the ache of the past, had just shifted forever. The thaw brought spring, and with it gossip. Out on the plains, where people's lives were small and hard, whispers traveled faster than the wind. It began in town in the general store when Clint rode in for flour and coffee. He could feel it the moment he stepped through the door, the way conversations dipped, the sidelong glances, the clerk's forced politeness. Mrs. Abernathy, the pastor's wife, stood by the shelf of canned peaches, pretending to read labels she'd already memorized. Her sharp eyes flicked toward Clint. "Mornin', Mr. Walker," she said in that sugary voice that always carried poison underneath. "How's life up at your ranch?" Clint adjusted his hat. "Same as ever. Busy. I hear you've taken in some company." "Ain't exactly company," he replied evenly. "A woman I found hurt. Nursing her back." Mrs. Abernathy's lips pursed. "Some say she was thrown out of her own family. That kind of woman brings trouble, Clint. You've got a young daughter to think about." Clint's jaw worked tight. He set the coffee tin on the counter harder than he meant to. "Appreciate your concern, ma'am. But the way I see it, the good book talks plenty about mercy, not much about running your mouth." She blinked, scandalized. By the time he left, the store had gone quiet again, but he knew the whispers would spread like wildfire. Back at the ranch, the world was softer. The hills were green now, the air full of birdsong and the scent of sage. Clara was standing by the clothesline, hanging up linens that fluttered in the breeze. She wore one of Ellie's mother's old dresses, sun-bleached, mended at the sleeves, and though it hung loose on her frame, it made her look alive again. Ellie chased chickens across the yard, laughter ringing through the morning. Clint watched from the barn doorway, the sight stirring something warm and dangerous in his chest. He hadn't seen that kind of peace since before his wife died. But peace in a town like theirs never lasted long. That afternoon Clara noticed it too. She'd gone into town with Clint for supplies and felt the shift. The way people looked at her, how their smiles tightened, how mothers pulled their children close as she passed. At first she tried to ignore it. But when they walked by the churchyard, two women turned their backs, whispering loud enough for her to hear. "That's her. The preacher's disgrace." God help Clint Walker tucking her in. Clara's steps faltered. Her fingers tightened around the basket in her hands. Clint noticed. "Don't mind them," he muttered. "Ain't got a soul in this town who doesn't think they're sittin' closer to heaven than the rest of us." "But they're right," Clara said quietly. "I am a disgrace. Everywhere I go, I bring shame." He stopped then, right in the middle of the dusty street, turning to face her. "Now you listen here. I've seen shame and it don't look like you. It looks like folks who'd rather throw stones than lend a hand." Her eyes filled, but she said nothing. That night, long after Ellie had gone to bed, Clara packed a small bundle, just a few clothes, the little comb Ellie had given her, and the shawl Clint's late wife once wore. Her hands shook as she folded each piece. She moved quietly, afraid to wake them. She couldn't bring more trouble into their lives. The gossip, the stares, it would only get worse. She'd learned long ago that when people decided you were unworthy, you couldn't change their minds. She reached for the latch on the door, and froze when she heard a soft sniffle behind her. Ellie stood in the shadows, her eyes glistening. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question, just a statement of truth. Clara's throat closed up. "I have to, sweetheart. Folks are talking. I don't want them hurting your papa or you because of me." Ellie's chin trembled. She took a step closer. "You are family," she whispered fiercely. "You cook with us, you pray with us, you tuck me in when papa's working late. You're my mama. You can't go." Clara fell to her knees, pulling the child into her arms, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh, Ellie," she whispered. "I wish I could believe I deserve that." That was when the front door creaked open. Clint stood there, his face shadowed by lamplight. He didn't say a word at first, just looked from Clara to the bundle on the floor. "You runnin'?" he asked quietly. Clara stood, trying to steady her voice. "It's for the best. The whole town's talking. They'll think. They already think plenty," Clint interrupted, his voice hard but calm. Ain't stopped me before. He took the bundle from her trembling hands and tossed it straight into the fire. The fabric caught fast, flames curling around it. You leave when you want to, Clara, he said. Not when a bunch of hypocrites tell you to. Clara covered her mouth, choking on a sob. Ellie clung to her skirt, whispering through her tears. Told you Papa wouldn't let you go. Clint stepped closer, his tone softening. You've done nothing wrong. This place, my home, it's yours as long as you want it. For a long time the only sound was the crackling fire. Clara's tears glimmered in the light, and Clint felt something shift again inside him, something that scared him as much as it soothed him. Because as he looked at her, this broken, brave woman who'd learned to flinch at kindness, he realized he wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was falling for her. It began with thunder. A low growl rolling across the plains, crawling through the night like a warning. The air was heavy, too still, too thick, and Clint could smell the storm coming before the first bolt ever struck. He was in the barn, stacking hay, when the sky split open. Rain came sudden and fierce, hammering against the roof in sheets. Lightning flashed over the fields, lighting up the world in cold white. Then, a sound that didn't belong. A crack. A roar. The unmistakable smell of smoke. Clint turned just in time to see fire licking up the far wall, fast and wild where lightning had struck the roof beam. The dry hay caught instantly, flames racing upward. Clara. Ellie, he bellowed, lunging for the door. The barn exploded into light and heat. Horses screamed, kicking at their stalls. Smoke clawed at his throat as he fought to unbolt the gates, slapping at the animals to drive them out into the rain. He freed two before a burning beam fell from above, smashing into the floor beside him. Sparks flew, smoke thick as tar filling his lungs. He coughed hard, blinking through the haze. He heard Ellie's voice faintly from outside. Papa. Papa. He shouted back, but the roar drowned him out. And then, through the chaos, he saw her. Claire. She came running through the storm, shawl-soaked, hair plastered to her face. Clint, she cried. Where are you? Get back, he shouted. It's not safe. But she didn't stop. She pushed through the smoke, yanking a bucket of water from the well, flinging it at the flames. The heat drove her back, but she came again, coughing, tears streaking through soot. He tried to reach her, but another beam fell between them. The fire roared like it wanted her. You fool woman, he shouted hoarsely. Get out. Not without you, she shouted back. And before he could stop her, she grabbed the heavy yoke from the ground and struck at the fallen beam, shoving debris aside, her skin blistering from the heat. She broke through just enough for him to stumble toward her. They both collapsed in the mud outside, choking, gasping, the barn blazing behind them. Ellie ran to them, sobbing. Papa. Clara. Clint pulled her into his arms, coughing so hard it brought up blood. Clara sat nearby, bent over, shaking, her hair singed, eyes wild. The storm poured over them like God himself had sent it to put out the fire. When it was over, the barn was gone. Only a skeleton of blackened beams stood against the rain. The horses were safe, the land was safe, and they were alive. But as Clint looked at Clara, soaked, trembling, her hands raw and red, something inside him broke wide open. He carried Ellie inside, tucked her into bed, then returned to find Clara sitting by the fire in the main room. She'd cleaned the soot from her skin, but her eyes were distant, haunted. He poured her a cup of coffee and set it down. She didn't touch it. Why'd you do that? He asked quietly. You could have died in there. Clara looked up, tears trembling in her lashes. Because you saved me when I wasn't worth saving. I couldn't let you burn because of me. Her voice cracked. She turned away, staring at the flames. You gave me a home, Clint. You and Ellie, you gave me more than I ever thought I'd have again. I couldn't just stand by. He watched her for a long time, then crossed the room and knelt in front of her. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow, every bruise, every scar visible, and yet she looked stronger than he'd ever seen her. Clara, he said softly, you think what they did to you made you less. But I've never met a braver soul in my life. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. You don't know what I've done. What I've been. Don't need to, he said. What I see's enough. Their eyes met, and for the first time she didn't look away. The silence between them was alive, thick with something that had no name yet but felt older than both of them. Clint reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her cheek. His fingers trembled when they touched her skin. You're worth Savon, Clara Mayfield, he whispered. Always were. She stared at him, eyes full of tears. Then she broke, sobbing, shaking, and he pulled her close. Her head rested against his chest, her hands clutching his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. "You don't have to be scared no more," he murmured. "You're home." And for the first time since that morning by the creek, Clara believed it. Outside the rain stopped. The wind carried away the smoke. The stars broke through again, bright and endless over the Wyoming plains. Inside the little cabin, two wounded souls sat by the dying fire. One who had saved, one who had been saved, and somewhere between them, love began to take its first fragile breath. The days after the fire were quiet. Too quiet. The air on the ranch seemed to carry the memory of smoke, even after the rains had washed everything clean. The barn stood in ruin, black timbers like the ribs of some fallen beast, and yet inside the house life began again in small trembling ways. Clint fixed what he could. Clara helped where she was allowed. She still bore burns on her hands, but she worked through the pain, mending, cleaning, and humming softly to Ellie as they worked. The little girl followed her everywhere now, hand in hers, calling her Mama without hesitation. And though Clara always froze a little when she heard it, Clint never corrected her. He'd just glance her way, hat low, and say quietly, "Seems she's finally sleepin' through the night again. That's thanks to you." Sometimes when Clara thought he wasn't looking, she'd smile. But peace is a fragile thing. It doesn't last long out on the frontier. It was a late afternoon when the rider came. Clint saw him first, a dark figure cresting the ridge, moving steady down toward the ranch. The man rode a black horse, long coat flapping behind him, hat brim low. And even before he drew near, Clint felt it, that old instinct tightening in his chest. Trouble. He stepped down from the porch, hand resting near his revolver. The rider dismounted slow, boots crunching the dirt. When he raised his head, Clint recognized him. "Preacher Harlan," Clint said, his tone flat as iron. The man smiled thinly. "Didn't think you'd remember me, Clint. Hard to forget a man who prays with one hand and points a gun with the other." The preacher chuckled. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Always were quick with words. I hear you've been talking in lost souls again." Clint didn't answer. Harlan took a few slow steps forward, his boots leaving deep prints in the mud. "Word travels fast out here. Folks talking about a woman. Said she washed up near dead. Said you been keeping her." Clint's jaw tightened. "She ain't your concern. Ain't she?" The preacher tilted his head, eyes gleaming under his hat brim. "You know who she is, Clint? You know what she done?" "I know enough." "Enough to know she's a sinner?" Clint's patience snapped like brittle wood. "Ain't we all?" Harlan smirked, but there was venom behind it. "She's wanted, Clint. Back east. For theft. For murder." Clint's hand hovered near his holster. "You're lying, Dot." "Am I?" The preacher tossed something into the dirt between them, a folded, rain-stained paper. Clint stooped to pick it up, eyes narrowing. It was a wanted poster. The face was Clara's, drawn rough but unmistakable. Below it, the words, "Clara Mayfield, fugitive. Theft aiding murder." Clara appeared in the doorway, drawn by the voices. Ellie clung to her skirt. The moment her eyes met the paper in Clint's hand, she went pale. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Harlan's smile widened. "See, she knows. She knows the truth always comes crawling home." Clint turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Clara," he said quietly, "is it true?" The silence stretched long enough to break something inside her. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Not the way he says," she whispered. "Please, Clint, let me explain." "You had your chance to run," the preacher cut in, stepping forward. "But now justice'll be done." He reached for her arm. That was his mistake. Clint drew faster than breath. Steel flashing, hammer cocked. "You take one more step, preacher," Clint growled, "and I'll send you to meet the maker you pretend to serve." Harlan froze, sneer twisting his lips. "You'll hang for her, cowboy?" "Then I'll hang doin' right." The standoff stretched, lightning again in the distance, the smell of rain building. Then Harlan spat in the dirt, swung onto his horse and rode off without another word. The thunder rolled behind him, carrying his promise back on the wind. "I'll be back." Clara sank to her knees, face buried in her hands. Ellie ran to her, crying, wrapping tiny arms around her shoulders. Clint crouched down beside them, his voice low but firm. "Tell me everything." And so she did. Between sobs and trembling breaths, she told him the truth. The preacher had once been her guardian, the man who took her in after her family's passing. But when she uncovered the way he used his church to swindle and harm the poor, she tried to expose him. He'd framed her instead, calling her thief and liar, even murderer when one of his men turned up dead after an argument. I ran, she said, tears streaking her face. They beat me, left me for dead, and I thought if I just kept moving maybe I could find peace somewhere far enough away. Clint listened, eyes dark with quiet fury. When she finished, he reached out, lifting her chin gently. You ain't runnin' no more, he said. He framed you once. He won't do it again. But he'll come back, she whispered. He always does. Clint stood, jaw set like carved stone. Then let him come. He looked out over the plains, where the preacher had vanished into the storm. He'll find out soon enough, this ranch don't scare easy. That night, the thunder rolled again, echoing across the open land. But inside the cabin, Clara didn't feel alone anymore. She sat with Clint and Ellie by the fire, the storm flashing beyond the window. And though fear still coiled inside her, something stronger had taken root. Trust, love, and a man willing to fight heaven and hell for her name. The night stretched long and restless. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Clint didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, shotgun laid across his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon where the preacher had vanished hours before. The stars hung cold and sharp above the Wyoming plains. Inside, Clara tended to Ellie, who'd fallen asleep clutching her little rag doll. Every creak of the house made Clara flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. When the first sliver of dawn touched the sky, Clint rose slowly to his feet. He knew that kind of man, the preacher would return at daybreak, not night. Evil like his loved witnesses, loved to hide behind daylight and law. He loaded his gun one last time, the sound echoing softly in the cold morning air. Clint. He turned. Clara stood in the doorway wearing one of his old coats over her dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. You don't have to do this, she said softly. Yes, I do. She stepped closer, eyes full of fear and something deeper. If you die because of me. He cut her off with a gentle hand against her cheek. Ain't dying today, Clara. Not with you and Ellie waitin'. Her lips trembled. Then promise me whatever happens, you'll believe I was worth fightin' for. He smiled faintly. Darlin', I already do. The first hoofbeats came low, steady, and many. Clint's eyes narrowed as he saw them cresting the ridge, 5 riders. The preacher rode in front, his black coat fluttering like a crow's wings, the rising sun a red wound behind him. They stopped 50 yards out. The preacher's voice carried across the open plain. Clint Turner. You're harboring a fugitive. Step aside and I might let you keep your soul. Clint cocked the hammer on his revolver. You already sold yours, Harlan. Ain't nothing left to save. The preacher smirked, raising his hand. His men fanned out, rifles glinting in the dawn light. Then you've chosen damnation. Reckon I have, Clint said quietly and fired first. The gunfire cracked like thunder. Bullets tore through the dry morning air. Dust and smoke rose around Clint as he fired again and again, ducking behind the trough. One of Harlan's men went down hard, another's horse screamed and bolted. Inside, Clara grabbed Ellie and pulled her to the floor. The child cried out, terrified, and Clara pressed her close, whispering prayers between trembling breaths. When the shooting paused, Clint shouted, "Stay down. Don't come out." Then another shot rang, close, too close, grazing his arm and spinning him back against the porch post. He gritted his teeth, blood seeping through his sleeve. The preacher rode closer, laughing, his voice cruel and clear. You can't save her, Turner. She's a stain on God's earth. Funny, Clint rasped, raising his gun. I thought God was in the business of cleanin' stains. He fired again, and this time the bullet struck true. The preacher staggered in the saddle, eyes wide in disbelief. His horse reared, throwing him hard into the dirt. Silence fell. Only the sound of wind and one wounded man breathing hard in the dust. Clint approached slowly, revolver steady. The preacher tried to speak, blood on his lips. She's cursed, Clint. You'll see. Clint looked down at him for a long, heavy moment. Then he holstered his gun and said quietly, No. She's the blessin' you never deserved. He turned and walked back toward the house, the preacher's last breath fading behind him. Clara met him halfway down the path. She ran to him, tears and sunlight on her face, clutching his arm where the blood had spread. You're hurt. Ain't nothin' that won't heal. He's gone, Clint said simply. It's over. Her knees gave out and she wept into his chest, weeks, months, maybe years of pain pouring out at once. Clint wrapped his arms around her, pressing his chin to her hair. You're safe now, Clara. You and Ellie both. Ellie peeked out from the door, her small voice carrying across the yard. Mama? Papa? Clint smiled through the ache. Come here, sweetheart. The little girl ran across the dirt barefoot, wrapping her arms around both of them. Clara held her tight, crying softly against Clint's chest as the sun finally climbed over the ridge, washing everything in gold. The fire was gone. The fear was gone. Only love remained, raw, fierce, and unbreakable. Epilogue. Weeks later, grass began to grow over the charred earth where the barn once stood. A new barn was rising, built stronger than before. Clint worked with one hand wrapped in cloth, Clara beside him, Ellie carrying little nails and giggling as she helped. As they stood together one evening, the sunset painting the sky, Clint turned to Clara and said quietly, "This land's seen enough death. Time it learned to hold life again." Clara smiled faintly, resting a hand on her belly, her eyes shining with the unspoken truth between them. "It already is." Clint froze, then smiled, slow, deep, full of wonder. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and looked out over the plains. The wind moved gentle through the grass. Somewhere, a hawk cried above the valley. And for the first time in years, the cowboy's home wasn't just a place. It was a family.